We are pleased to introduce the second annual Women's Alumni Engagement Workshop. And the first in a series of She Opened the Door panels. My name is Kathleen Crowley. I'm an alumni of the School of Public Health. I'm also privileged to be a 2017 University Alumni Medalist recipient and co-chair of She Opened the Door. I would like to introduce and welcome our co-chair, Teresa Saputo-Currend, Columbia College and Business, who will share a little bit about the inaugural Women's Conference.
Thank you, Kathleen. Good morning, everybody. So it's exciting. On February 9th through 11th of 2018, the Columbia Alumni Association, with all 18 of our schools, will host the first ever university-wide women's conference titled She Opened the Door. The name She Opened the Door is a tribute to a woman named Winifred Edgerton Merrill, Columbia's first woman to receive a degree in 1886. She received a PhD in mathematics. A university-wide group of alumni leaders are planning the conference. It'll include valuable engagement and development opportunities. There will be eye-opening speakers, personalized workshops, roundtable discussions, and more. More than 1,000 alumni and students from across the campus and across the world will attend. And to date, several alumni keynotes and panelists have been secured, including Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who graduated from the law school in 1959, and Sally Krawcheck, who graduated from the business school in 1992. So we're really looking forward to it, and we hope we'll see you in February as well.
Thank you, Teresa. Next, I would like to thank our panelists in advance. But first, it's my pleasure to welcome and present our moderator, Emily Ball-Jabor, Social Work 2006. Emily is a significant leader within Columbia University community and has served on the Columbia Alumni Association Board since 2013. Previously served as president of the School of Social Work Alumni Board and chair of the annual Social Work Alumni Conference. While the bios are in your folder, I'd like to also highlight that last year, Emily chaired this weekend's event, the annual Leaders Weekend, and is currently serving as a member of the Alumni Leaders Weekend Planning Committee and the CAA 2023 Task Force. Emily is the recipient of several prestigious awards, including the George McMurray Award by the National Association for Social Work to recognize outstanding accomplishments and contributions made to services to children and families by a graduating student. She has the Presidential Management Fellowship, and this year is a 2017 Columbia University Alumni Medal recipient. Emily began her career with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in the Administration for Children and Families, where she continues today as the Performance Officer in the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation. Without further ado, please join in welcoming Emily.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you all for coming this morning. I'm very pleased to be here moderating this panel, but I really want to put the focus on them and spend time learning from their journeys and experiences. So I'm going to go right into introducing our panelists today. First, directly on my right here, is Danielle Magid, a graduate of Columbia College and the Business School. She is the Executive Vice President of Global Solutions with Fox Networks Group. Next to her is Dr. Monica Sweeney. She is the Vice Dean for Global Engagement and a clinical professor and chair of the Department of Health Policy and Management in the School of Public Health at SUNY Downstate Medical Center. And then on the end is Rebecca Soffer, a graduate of the School of Journalism, and she is the co-founder and CEO of Modern Loss, a publication and community offering candid original essays, resources, and connections on loss. Now, all of you have their full bios here, so I'm not going to spend time going through all of that, because I would rather start by having you hear from them directly. So why don't I let each of the panelists give maybe a brief introduction to sort of elaborate on the short descriptions I've provided. Do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. First off, I want to thank Kathleen, Donna, Teresa, Rebecca, and Emily for including me today. I've been really involved with the college, not so much with the business school, although I'm really attached to the business school, in a really informal way. So this is one of the first more formal gatherings that I've been able to do, and I'm really honored that they asked me. So yeah, I mean, as Emily mentioned, I'm currently with 21st Century Fox. My career is very non-linear, so to speak, so I'll have lots to talk about when I sit down with each of you, which is the part I'm really looking forward to, and sort of go through the different stops and starts that I've had in my career. Your turn.
I'm Monica Sweeney. I am presently the Vice Dean for Global Engagement at SUNY Downstate and the Chair of Health Policy, graduate of the Mailman School of Public Health, class of '92. And I've had a very nonlinear career as well. And when we talk about, I just love she opened the door using your leadership skills, because each time you go to a situation, you're opening different sorts of doors. And not everyone's door is the same kind of door. And so we all have very different stories about how we got to where we are. And I think it's really wonderful to have this opportunity to share the different ways, the detours for some, obstacles and challenges that got you to where you are. And I'm looking forward to that and to hearing from you all when we do our breakouts.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Soffer, and I think that Danielle and Monica and I can start a doo-wop group called the Nonlinears, because that's very much my experience as well. I went to Emory University for undergrad, and I graduated from the journalism school here in 2005, which I'm still recovering from exhaustion-wise. It was a wonderful, wonderful, tiring year. And it's safe to say that I never saw myself doing what I do now when I was in grad school. If you had told me I'd be, launching and running a site that is turning into a book on loss and candid conversation around it for younger people, I would have said, why on earth would I ever want to do that? So the joke was on me, and here I am. And I think it just shows that you can have your goals, but you also have to kind of be flexible and roll with things. And as Monica says, there are a lot of different doors that open, and there are different types of doors, and you just have to kind of learn how to walk through each one in a different way. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited to talk about that.
So that's a good point for us to jump off on, if you don't mind, actually. My first question for you is, I would love for you to give a more specific example of a personal story where you've had a particular goal and how you got there. And so maybe if you want to use that as a jump off point, Rebecca, about what you just mentioned about maybe, where you started on that jumping off point.
Sure. Well, I guess to be specific regarding what I do now, I went to journalism school with the goal of being the next Charles Kuralt, which, I don't know how many people know him, but CBS Sunday Morning, I just wanted to produce really thoughtful pieces on TV that were kind of, wry, but also very intelligent, or do it for NPR, or maybe somehow realize, have Terry Gross realize that she'd made a terrible mistake and she wanted me to do her job instead. So none of that has happened. Instead, what happened was I went straight out of grad school to work at the Colbert Report, because I love journalism very much, and I was in grad school the year that, we call it like the rise of the blog. It was the year that the Huffington Post launched, the day before we graduated. And we were all staring at each other and asking, well, what does this mean? Like, what's a blog? Like, what's blogging? What does this mean for journalism? And we didn't know the answer, but we did know that we knew enough to know that we didn't know what was about to happen. So we knew enough to know that we were ignorant, and that we might have to be a little flexible here and kind of reinterpret what journalism looked like. That it might not look like Live at 5 or the Police Beat. It could look like a lot of other things too. So that's how I ended up at Colbert, because I always really loved Stephen. And I thought that, him at The Daily Show, it kind of dawned on me that they were doing more journalism than a lot of the Live at 5 stations. So I made it, a personal goal for me to be able to work for them. And let me tell you, it was not easy trying to convince, Comedy Central production company to hire someone with an MS in journalism, when a lot of the people there were comedians, were members of the Writers Guild. But I realized very quickly that this was kind of this brave new world of content, and that you could apply your expertise in many different areas. And it took months. It took many, many months. They were interviewing dozens and probably hundreds of people. But I realized that, what I did was come up with different pitches to get seen by the producers. And I would take headlines from the news that were real and try and find the satire in them. Because if you can find, so much of what's happening in the world is ludicrous anyway, that if you just sit with it, you can see things in a different way. So I would just twist them a little bit and try and figure out a way that it could actually be produced for a comedy piece, while also still being very smart. And what I learned as I was just coming up with these pitches was that sometimes the best way to get the tough messaging across is actually through levity, through humor. It's a really good way to serve up the hard truth to people. And the more I realized that, the easier the pitches became for me, and I was lucky enough to be hired there. So that was a huge personal goal because, a lot of people wanted to work there, and I never thought I would be hired there. And I was. And it really was just about kind of like softening my view. When you soften your focus a little bit, and then it becomes so much easier to focus, if that means anything.
Monica, why don't you, same question. Could you tell us a personal goal that you've had in your career and how you accomplished that?
I'm going to tell you, I'm going to sanitize it a little bit, and I'm going to shorten it a lot. And I don't want anyone here to use my strategic plan because it was not a feminist plan. But okay, so when I went to my high school counselor and said I wanted to be a physician, she looked at me as if I said I wanted to be a Martian and said, "Don't you mean a nurse?" And after several counseling sessions with her, I decided she was right, because she said, is your family rich? And do you know a black woman physician? And at the time that I was making that decision, both of those were negatives. And so she says, I think nursing is better for you. So I went to nursing school and became an RN. And right after that, I got a really terrific job. And one of the people that has influenced me in terms of leadership most was a woman that I met at this job at Montefiore Hospital. I worked there for a while, and then I met the man that I was going to marry. And my job performance tanked. Instead of being to work early and being the most conscientious and saying, is there anything else you need before I leave? I was late out the door, and he became the most important thing in my life. And fast forward, we got engaged, and I said, I just have to tell you that it's all right to get married, but I have a goal. I'm going to go to medical school. And if you can agree to that, then we can get married. And I would have agreed to get married to him anyway, but he didn't know that. And so we got married, and I kept on talking about going to medical school, and a couple of kids later. And I was at the dinner table one night, coming home from work in July. I remember specifically because I was orienting new interns and new interns. And it just irked me that I was not one. And I sat at the dinner table complaining and groaning, but my vision had never changed, that I was going to be a physician. And start with where you are, use what you have, is what I've always had to do everything that I did. And so at the dinner table that night, my husband said, here's the deal. I'll pay the mortgage, I'll find help for the children, I'll do everything. You either go to medical school or stop talking about it. And so I went to work the next day and resigned from my job. And as they say, the rest is history. There's more. But I just wanted to leave the idea that your vision has to be pretty strong, and you have to be pretty convinced yourself that you really want to do something, or it's very easy for people to make decisions about who you are and what you should do. And one of my friends said, you're skipping a generation. You should be a teacher, and then your kids could go to medical school. you have to be firm in what your vision is for yourself or your company or whatever it is you want to do, and then you can make a way to do it.
Thank you. Same question.
Last but not least, so I'm going to take you guys back all the way to 1990, and my slant's going to be a little different, focused a little bit more on sort of leadership, and something I learned really early on about the kind of leader I wanted to be. So in 1990, I was obsessed, my first job, with working at the NBA. That's all I wanted. I had 23 interviews. I was bartending on the side, trying to like support myself while continuing to go from division to division, trying to get in at the National Basketball Association. So I ended up at the production division last, the entertainment division, and they asked me to take there's a couple of nuances to the story. They asked me to take a typing test in order to, this was 1990, in order to be a production assistant on some of their programs. So I sort of questioned it, like, why do I have to take a typing test? And none of the guys I'm applying with seem to have to take that. But I took it, and I dismally failed it, where I had 10 words a minute. So I became known as the perfect 10 for the next 6 years while I worked there. But they actually rescinded my job offer after I took the typing test and failed it miserably. And so I had my first lesson in what you should, you know, how Sheryl Sandberg says, leaning in. Well, you know, I was 21, and I leaned in really hard and said, how can you rescind my job offer? Guys didn't have to take the same job offer. I mean, sorry, you know, the same typing test in order to get in. That doesn't seem right. And I was very vocal about it. And I put it in writing, in a letter. And even back then, in 1990, the NBA was run by lawyers, and they got a little nervous. So they gave me back my job offer. So I learned really early, you know, in 1990, and I was the only woman in the entire, there was 33 employees at NBA Entertainment, this division, and I was the second woman, actually. There was someone else who was a little bit higher than me who came in right when I started. And so I learned early to be, as I say, communicative, you know, on what you think is right, and in a diplomatic way, as much as you can, when you really believe that you're not, that you're being wronged. So so then I took the job, and it was amazing, and I started meeting with lots of different divisions within the National Basketball Association, and I saw something that was really interesting to me, which was different leadership styles and different management styles. And, you know, again, I was only 21 and 22 at the time, and I saw especially that the women that were in senior positions, in the league office in particular, were very tight and not the way they were outside the office. So they sort of came across, it was as if they were forcing themselves to be really buttoned up, and they had a much sort of higher standard of which they thought they had to act versus some of the male leaders. And I talk a lot about this in some of the panels that I do. The male leaders appeared a little looser, a little more authentic to who they really were inside and outside the office. And so having spent 5.5 years there, I took away that that's not the leader that I wanted to be. I wanted to be a really authentic leader, someone who treated my teams, and I have 120 people now, and I am exactly the same sort of inside the office as I am outside the office. And so I learned that at a really early age. It just wasn't the kind of person that I wanted to be in the office, in an environment where I'm spending, you know, 10 to 12 hours a day. And it was something that really resonated early.
I think that's something that probably we all as women struggle with, is feeling that sense of whether you can be an authentic version of yourself in your workplace. I think that's something I feel like I've heard as a common theme for sure. Something that I've noticed in my career so far is that I've often learned more from the mistakes that I have made than the successes. So I'm wondering if any of you would like to comment on perhaps a mistake or a misstep you have made at some point that ended up being beneficial to where you are now. Anyone wants to take that?
My first real leadership job was more to be a manager. I was supposed to do both. And I figured out that it was very difficult to do both effectively, because the person that was the CEO, I was a clinical director and there was a CEO. he managed by crisis management. His leadership was all about crises. We went from one crisis to another without time to really have time to plan and to evaluate. And so I started out in the culture of this organization and started doing the same thing that was the culture of the organization. And at one point, I met with the person that was the CEO and said, there's a lot of things I need to talk to you about, and when can we leave the setting and get out of here and go and talk about it, how we can improve this organization. And he said, we don't need to leave the setting. That's one thing that he said. We need to be able to set a time to do this. And so one of the things that I learned early on was to make time to communicate with people that you work with, and not just the leadership. That was one of the things that I had not done in the confusion, that once we started doing it, it made a lot of difference. So having a time to make sure you communicate and include everybody in the discussion that needs to be there. A lot of times when you do things from the top down, they don't work. So I learned early on to make sure that you include the people that your decisions are going to affect so they can have ownership. So I made one mistake by trying to change the hours that the organization was open. We did, the two of us together. And we got a lot of pushback. And so we let it drop, and then we had a big meeting and talked about it and did an actual survey, even though I didn't know how to write surveys at that point. Hadn't done my MPH at that point. And it worked much better when you include the people that you're going to affect. Carrots and sticks don't really work, and that's what I learned from including the people that were going to be affected. I'll just tell you about this job where I was about to get fired when I met my husband. The woman who was my supervisor sat me down and she said, I have two choices. I have plenty of reasons that I could fire you, but I want to give you a choice. You can either get fired, resign, or I can promote you. And I've used that all through my career, to always give people the opportunity to know what it is, how it is they're not meeting the responsibilities that they have, and give them an opportunity to correct it. More as a coach than a supervisor. And that has worked really quite well after making a few mistakes along that line.
Anybody else on a mistake you want to highlight for us?
Can I say an almost mistake?
Yes, yes.
There was an almost mistake because it could have been a really bad mistake, and I'm sure a lot of people in the room are confronted with situations like this. So about, let's see, in the year 2000, I was offered to go work with a company called StubHub. At the time, it was called something else. And in 2000, it was this like upstart, no one understood what it was. People thought it was a broker, ticket broker. And, you know, it was just, no one knew what it was. And it was actually breaking into a whole new territory of sort of access into events. And so I ended up advising them, and they offered me a full-time job. And I almost didn't take it because it wasn't an established sports company, entertainment company, something that people were familiar with and knew. And I had a lot of people chirping in my ear, what are you going to go, you know, why? It was a very disruptive company. And so I ended up there for 14 years later, fast forward. And so all I would say is that it was almost a mistake by listening to people who thought they knew better. And it's really great to get advice and feedback, but to not sometimes looking at the more disruptive choice that's not on the sort of more straight, and this is, I think, applies to all of us, you know, and it's not on the straight and narrow road, and just being really open-minded about what feels good inside of you. And like, I knew it was the right decision for me inside. I knew we were going to build this incredible company that went from, you know, nothing to a $4 billion company. And I just felt it. I felt my intuition. So go with your gut and be really, really, and I almost didn't take it, and be open-minded about more disruptive opportunities that cross your path. Yeah. Yeah.
You use those same words with me. I was speaking with Rebecca this morning about when she made the jump into where she is now in her career, and she literally used those same words, that she had to trust her intuition.
Yeah, your instinct.
And your instinct. So do you want to tell us
Sure.
more about that?
And I guess this is less about, an actual mistake, though I have, I would say 99% of my actions in life are mistakes. I'm like the most fallible human I've ever met. But if you want me to talk about, trusting your gut, what I was saying is that, I don't know about you guys, but I feel like I always wish that every single day I would get a really strong gut instinct, and then that would really drive me to make a big decision and just know that it's the right decision and move on. But I don't think I'm lucky enough to get a lot of those really strong gut feelings. So what I've learned from that is that when I get them, typically I should act on them. And even if my mind is thinking one thing, if I really feel it, if people are naysaying all around me and they're giving all these reasons why I shouldn't be doing something or something else, if I'm really feeling it in my gut, it means that it's the right thing to do for me with the information that I have at the time. And that is the reason that I decided to jump into what I'm doing right now, which is, it's called Modern Loss. It's an online publication, and actually we have a book coming out in January with HarperCollins. So this is something that a lot of people thought was a really ridiculous idea on my part. I, as I had mentioned, I was working in political satire and producing pieces, and then continued producing events, and I was an independent producer for a lot of different content. And then when I was 30, I lost my mom. She was killed in a car accident. And 3 years later, I lost my dad. So he had a heart attack and did not survive. And this was not my life plan. This was absolutely not the way I thought life was going to go. And it's a whole other story that I could talk about for hours, but it's very isolating. I was working full-time in daily television production for a comedy show in New York City and dealing with loss. And I was single, I had a lot of friends, and I still felt isolated because everybody around me was focused on building their lives, as was I. But I was also suddenly focused on losing everything. And it was a really weird plane to live on. And so after grappling with that for a few years and trying to find my tribe and my team of people who could support me, I realized that what had been really missing for me was an outlet where I could connect with other people who were going through something similar. And I really had trouble searching online for resources that really spoke to me, that weren't, really patronizing, to be honest, filled with platitudes, or clinical, which is very helpful sometimes, but you can also drive yourself crazy if you're self-diagnosing on the DSM-4 at 1 in the morning when all you're doing is really grieving, or something that was really cheesy and you're reading it through a soft filter lens, and it's just not helpful. What I really needed was to read other people's stories of adversities that they had faced and proof from them that somehow it was going to be okay, somehow, even if they couldn't tell me when or how or where. And so I realized that what was missing for me was this outlet where I could, really publish stories that were about life with loss. And when you come down to it, it's something that's going to happen to everybody. But people still don't want to talk about it. It's still a stigma. And I got really sick of that. And so I finally decided that as a journalist, as a writer, as a producer, I could do this really well as an editor. And I had enough distance between myself and my actual losses, like when my parents actually died, that this wasn't going to be my psychology project. It wasn't going to be the Rebecca Therapy Project. It was just going to be something where I knew the content, I knew the content I should populate it with, but I could do it really well professionally. And I was surrounded by so many people, I would say almost everybody, who said, that sounds super morose. That's so creepy. Why would you ever want to do that day in and day out? It sounds really morbid. And I was just like, well, if you've ever met me, I freaking work for a comedy show for several years. I don't really think that I'm the Danny Darkcloud that's going to sit on the sofa and publish really depressing stories. What I really want this to be is something optimistic, something about life, something about resilience. And if you guys can't see that, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is too much of a downer for people. But then I started meeting people here and there and talking about my idea, and someone would say, oh, my mom died when I was 17. I had no one to talk to about it. that sounds amazing, or somebody else. And then kind of word got around, and I was like, you know what? If there are enough people, if I've spoken to a total of 5 people who feel like this is resonating with them, I just need to press play on this. Because what I realized was the worst possible thing that could happen was that it wouldn't work, was that it would reach 0 human beings, and that it would just be a big failed experiment. But what I really didn't want to do was live for the rest of my life wishing I had done it and not having done it, because the time spent in preparing it and building it and launching it would be a blip compared to the time that I would spend afterward regretting not having done it. So that is the biggest example of when I've listened to my gut and, you know, threw a big pot of boiling spaghetti against the wall to see what would stick. And here I am almost 4 years later, and we have a community of, you know, about 15,000 Facebook followers. We have about 12,000 Twitter followers. We have had events all over the country, and we have a book coming out in a few months that Mindy Kaling is apparently excited about. So, you know,
Nice.
I'm glad I didn't listen to all those people.
Yes.
And some of them were really good friends of mine, and I still love them, but they had no idea what they were talking about.
Something that you touched on, I mean, I think what's interesting is, you know, thinking about women in leadership is that we wear a lot of different hats. And so, you know, touching on your sense in the world as a daughter, through your experiences, Rebecca, but then we're also caregivers. We're mothers, you know, we're taking care of parents perhaps later in life. And that sort of leads me down this road of, you know, as leaders in your fields, how do you pay it forward for other women to sort of, you know, kind of bring along more women into your industries? You know, what do you see as your role in that? How do you sort of pay it forward in that way?
Just go down the
Sure, yes.
So I've done it really informally since I was 22, actually, just mentoring even kids in high school, right? And so you just sort of progress along the path. There's the informal and the formal. So informally, yikes, I think I talk to both men and women 50 a month. It's a lot. And my kids are annoyed because I'll talk to people from home. So there's the informal way. And the formal way, look, I've been like super involved with a couple of different industry organizations, you know, Women in Sports and Events. And then we have something we started called Women at Fox Sports. And it came from nothing. It was started a year before I came to the company. And now, you know, I'm an executive leader for them. And it's like 700 people that are not just in the Fox Sports division. And that's what I call formal. And it's up to each person to give back. I mean, this is not to mention the community. I'm on a different bunch of boards. Like, I'm not talking about the community stuff. But career-wise, I think we're all faced with what's the balance between formal and informal, and, you know, how you want to work it out. And for me, I've found it through those sort of more formal and more mentoring on the informal side.
I do both formal and informal as well. I'm sad, actually, that I don't go to grammar schools anymore, but I used to go to grammar schools, and I've just moved it up a little bit to high schools and colleges, where I do a lot of public speaking, especially around the tri-state area, but other places too. I'm very active in organizations that have bridge programs to help underrepresented minorities in particular to get on the path to go to medical school. But I don't just do it for medical school, because I do it for STEM programs as well, because there's so many young women who think that STEM is not for them. And so I talk to groups all the time about education in general. Many students that I talk to are the ones who are going to inferior schools, who often don't have the usual role models that other people have. And so my going there is a way of saying, this is what I did, this is how I did it, these are the detours that I had to take to get to be a physician leader, because I'm active in the medical society for, right now we're trying to get a one-payer system in the United States. So you just go and do the things that you can do, that you see, and encourage people along the way who think that they are not able to do it. And you sometimes have to get really down and dirty. I do, to give them the nitty-gritty details so that they don't look at me and think, as some people do and have said, they don't see the connection between where you are and where they are, that they can actually do it. So it sometimes involves getting really specific and getting into great detail, but whether it's formal or informal or high school or college, or now we're starting a mentoring group for underrepresented minorities who are in academia, who don't get to go the right route for tenure. They don't know about it. They don't have examples of people who've done it in their circles, and so we're just starting a group to help underrepresented faculty, women especially, to get on the tenured track in universities.
That's a tough act to follow, so my inclination is just to stay quiet, but I will say that I do informal. However, I feel like I am in that time that you were talking about where I have just no balance. I have a 6-month-old baby and a 3-year-old, so I feel like I'm in that period where I'm very much in the weeds in life, and I am just like, oh man, I barely made it here today because I had to put the baby down for a nap and then throw everyone to my husband, and it's so nuts. And especially being an entrepreneur and just wearing all the hats, it's so overwhelming, and I just feel like work and life is just blurred at every minute of the day, including at 3 in the morning when I'm awake with the baby and I'm thinking of an idea and I'm just writing it down. So I feel like I've kind of come to accept that, and in accepting it, it doesn't make it less stressful, but it makes it easier to just roll with it, because I've realized there's going to be no balance for a very, very long time, right? Like if ever, like maybe when I'm like dead, like I will have balance because I will just be like not alive. But right. But in terms of, so when I am an active member of Emory University Alumni organization, I have never stopped signing up for mentoring programs there, speaking with young graduates, talking to them about, pursuing a career in media, and also like coming up. I'm very good at helping people brainstorm. I'm not good at helping myself, but I don't know if you guys can relate, but I'm really good at helping people think outside the box with their own ideas, and yet not with my own life. So I've never stopped doing that. Because I think that media is such a general term now, and it can mean so many things, and I feel like people still have sometimes one-track ideas of what they are able to do, but they can do so much more if you just kind of free your thinking a lot. So I do that with a lot of Emory University graduates, with a lot of J-School graduates I've spoken to over the years. I'm involved with a lot of grief organizations that support kids and young people who have lost a primary caregiver, and I try and be a presence of optimism, really. I don't have, a social work degree or medical degree. I don't have any actual initials after my name, sadly, except for MS. But I try and be a support to those people and encourage them. But in terms of informally, it's really that. It's like, I know what it's like to do my own thing, to have to wear all the hats. I know what it's like to have young kids and wonder if you're, can you take a step back, or do you have to go all in? I mean, we can't all be Sheryl Sandberg. So what I try and do is whenever I have a project for my company, I try and find women who can do a project who are in a similar boat as me. I mean, I tried to get this great illustrator. I thought she was a genius illustrator, and she has 2 little kids, and she's at home for the next couple of years. But she's so talented, and I don't want her to like artistically atrophy. So I begged her. She said she didn't have the time to do a project, and I was like, "You're way too talented to not do this." So I try and throw projects at women like this, because I know what this feels like, and I want to keep them feeling productive and keep their self-esteem going and keep feeling like they're not really atrophying in their professional talents while they're at home doing what they really want to be doing as well. It's a hard stage. And so those are the type of women I'm really trying to connect with right now.
this is the part of the session. Thank you so much for your remarks. What I'm hoping has now happened is that these remarks have inspired each of you, and so we want to give all of you an opportunity to kind of talk within your groups at your tables, reflecting on the comments that our speakers have made today, but then also to bring some of your experiences to bear, but to share with each other. Each of your tables has a facilitator who's going to lead the conversation. Please make sure that you try and be courteous and mindful of one another to allow people the time to also share. And we are going to go until 11:30, so about for the next half hour or so. And I'd like to thank our panelists today for sharing their great stories.